I want you to picture a Thanksgiving table. Turkey bones picked clean, the good tablecloth with the gravy stain nobody ever manages to get out, my husband's voice carrying easily over the noise of 11 relatives all talking at once. He was telling the story again. The one about the overtime. The one about the impossible 6 weeks at the office covering for a coworker on medical leave. Everyone at that table believed him. His mother believed him. My sister believed him. I had believed him, 5 of those 6 weeks. And then my 8-year-old daughter, chewing on a dinner roll, looked up from her plate and asked one question. The room went quiet in a way I will never forget. Not because the question was dramatic. It wasn't. It was small. It was the kind of question only a child would think to ask, because only a child hasn't learned yet which questions you're not supposed to say out loud. But before I tell you what she asked, and what it undid, let me tell you about where you're watching from tonight. Drop it in the comments. I read every one. Because 11 months before that dinner, I thought the worst thing my husband had ever done to me was forget our anniversary. I had no idea what I was actually about to find out. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 39. I teach 3rd grade at a public school 15 minutes from the house Thomas and I bought 9 years ago, back when we were the kind of young and broke that felt romantic instead of stressful. Thomas is an insurance adjuster. 41 years old, methodical, the kind of man who alphabetizes the spice rack without being asked and has never once raised his voice at me in 14 years of marriage. He isn't a big talker. He shows love in casseroles left in the fridge with sticky notes, in remembering exactly how I take my coffee, in the way he always checked the locks before bed. We have one daughter, Emma, 8 years old, all elbows and opinions, the kind of kid who corrects adults' grammar without a trace of irony. For most of our marriage, if you'd asked me to describe Thomas in one word, I would have said steady. Not exciting. Not spontaneous. Steady, in the way a floor beam is steady, you don't think about it until you're standing on it during a storm. So when he started coming home late on Thursdays in October, I didn't think much of it at first. Big case, he said, the first Thursday, loosening his tie at 11:15 at night. Marcus is out on medical leave, so I'm covering his files too. That's a lot, I said. Yeah. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the fridge, like he was deciding whether to eat something. It's fine. It's temporary. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? Thomas didn't lie. In 14 years, I could count on one hand the number of times I'd caught him in even a small one, and each of those had been the harmless kind, like telling his mother he loved her cooking when he privately thought she oversalted everything. But Thursdays kept happening. Every week, like clockwork. He'd leave for work at 7:30 like normal, and instead of coming home at 6, he wouldn't walk in the door until 10, sometimes 11. Always exhausted. Always a little distracted. Always smelling faintly of something I couldn't place. Not cologne, not The Office. Something sharper. Almost medicinal. I didn't think of fair. I want to be honest about that, because so many of these stories go straight there, and mine didn't. Not at first. What I thought was his overworked, and I should make this easier on him, not harder. So I did what steady wives do. I kept dinner warm. I didn't ask too many questions. I told myself 6 weeks wasn't forever. It was our 10th anniversary that made the first crack show. I'd booked the same restaurant we went to on our first date, a little Italian place downtown that had somehow survived a decade of Omaha's restaurant turnover. I sat there for 40 minutes before he called. Claire, I am so sorry. A client emergency came up, I couldn't get away. On our anniversary. I know how that sounds. I'll make it up to you, I promise. I sat alone at that table a little longer than I needed to, watching the candle burn down, doing the math in my head. Insurance claims don't usually have emergencies at 8 o'clock on a Thursday night. Not the kind that can't wait until morning. That was the first night the word affair crossed my mind. I hated myself for thinking it. And I couldn't stop. 2 weeks later, I found a receipt in his coat pocket while doing laundry. Not from a restaurant. Not from a hotel. From a hospital gift shop. A small bouquet, $12.99, paid in cash. I stood in the laundry room holding that receipt for a long time. A hospital gift shop doesn't necessarily mean an affair. I knew that. But it also didn't match anything he'd told me. He hadn't mentioned a sick coworker, a hospitalized client, anything. I did something I'm not proud of. I looked through his phone while he was in the shower. I found nothing damning. No messages from a woman, no secret contact saved under a fake name. Just a single text thread with a number saved only as C, short and functional. Same time Thursday? Okay, See you there. Sent every week, going back 6 weeks.
C. Not a name I recognized from his office.
Not a client I'd ever heard of.
I told myself I was being paranoid.
And then, the following Thursday, I did something I'd never done in 14 years of marriage.
I followed him. He didn't go to a hotel.
He didn't go to a bar, or an apartment, or anywhere I'd imagined in my worst late-night spirals. He went into St. Catherine's Medical Center, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and walked into the oncology infusion unit like he'd done it 50 times before, because, I would later learn, he had. I sat in my car in the garage for 20 minutes, arguing with myself about whether to go up.
Curiosity 1.
I found him through the glass window of the infusion room. He was sitting beside a chemo chair, holding the hand of a thin woman in a scarf, bald underneath it, and 4 lines taped into the back of her hand. She was laughing at something he'd said, a real laugh, tired but real, and he was laughing too, in a way I hadn't seen him laugh in months.
I didn't recognize her, but I recognized the shape of his face in hers. The same slightly crooked smile. The same way of tilting the head when they laughed. I didn't go in.
I went back to my car and sat there until my hands stopped shaking, and then I drove home and didn't say anything, because I didn't yet understand what I'd seen, only that it wasn't what I'd feared, and somehow that made it more confusing, not less. It took me 3 days of quiet detective work, a maiden name half-remembered from an old wedding photo album, a search through public records, a Facebook profile with the privacy settings just loose enough, to put it together. Her name was Carol Whitfield.
44 years old. A hairdresser. Divorced, 1 grown son.
And her maiden name, before her first marriage 20 years ago, had been Carol Bennett.
Thomas's sister.
I had been married to this man for 14 years, and I had never once heard him mention having a sister. I didn't confront him right away. I sat with it for almost a week, turning it over, trying to understand why a man who told his mother-in-law the truth about hating cilantro would hide an entire sibling from his wife of 14 years. When I finally asked him, quietly, at the kitchen table, after Emma was asleep, he didn't deny it. He just looked relieved, in a strange way, like he'd been carrying something heavy and someone had finally offered to help hold it.
Her name's Carol, he said. She's my sister.
Older by 3 years.
Why didn't I know that? He was quiet for a long moment.
Because my mother made it very clear, a long time ago, that Carol didn't exist anymore.
Not to this family.
He told me the story slowly, like it hurt to say out loud, which I think it did. When Thomas was 19 and Carol was 22, their father died of a heart attack, sudden and unexpected. In the chaos afterward, Carol had made a decision their mother never forgave. She'd moved in with a boyfriend Diane despised, a man 12 years older than Carol, within 4 months of the funeral. Diane saw it as abandonment, disrespect, a daughter choosing a stranger over her grieving mother. Diane gave an ultimatum. Carol comes home, breaks it off, or she's not welcome in this family.
Not at Christmas. Not at anything. Carol didn't come home.
The relationship with the older man ended within 2 years anyway. Badly, it turned out he had a drinking problem and a temper, but by then the damage between mother and daughter had calcified into something neither of them knew how to undo. Thomas, 19 and terrified of losing the only parent he had left, chose his mother.
Not because he believed she was right.
Because he was scared, and because that's what you do when you're 19 and grieving and someone tells you where loyalty is supposed to point. I chose wrong, Thomas told me at that kitchen table, 22 years later.
I knew it was wrong even while I was doing it.
And every year it got harder to fix, because fixing it meant admitting how long I'd let it go. Then, 4 months ago, Carol had called him.
Not their mother.
Him, directly, for the first time in over 2 decades.
She had stage 3 breast cancer.
She had 1 grown son who worked long-haul trucking routes and couldn't always be there for appointments. She had, she told him, almost no one else to call.
I'm not asking you to fix 20 years, she'd said.
I'm asking you to sit with me on Thursdays so I'm not doing this alone. So I said yes, Thomas told me. And I didn't tell you, because the second I tell you, it becomes real.
It becomes something my mother could find out about.
And I know that sounds insane, Claire. I'm a grown man, I shouldn't still be scared of my mother's opinion, but some habits don't care how old you are. I sat there absorbing all of it, relief that it wasn't betrayal in the way I'd feared, and a different, colder kind of hurt underneath it. Because even if it wasn't an affair, he had still built a wall between us for 6 weeks. He had still decided, alone, that I couldn't be trusted with this. You let me think I was crazy, I said. You let me sit at that restaurant on our anniversary and wonder what I did wrong.
I know. His voice cracked slightly. I'm sorry.
I didn't know how to hold both things at once, my sister, and you, and my mother, without one of them breaking.
I understood the impulse. I didn't excuse it. Both of those things were true at the same time.
Which brings us back to that Thanksgiving table. Thomas had decided, we had decided, together, in the weeks after that kitchen conversation, that we weren't ready to tell Diane the truth yet. Carol didn't want a family confrontation while she was mid-treatment. She wanted quiet, low-stakes Thursdays, not a war. So when Diane, sitting at the head of the table with her wine glass and her sharp, watchful eyes, asked Thomas why he'd been so tired lately, he told the story again. The overtime story. Marcus's medical leave. The impossible 6 weeks at the office. I watched him say it smoothly, easily, to a table full of people who loved him and trusted him completely, including, still, in some complicated way, me. I felt the old, cold discomfort rise in my chest again. Not because I thought he was cheating anymore, but because I understood now how easily this family had trained him to life apiece. And that's when Emma, chewing on a dinner roll, looked up from her plate. "Daddy," she said, in the clear, unbothered voice of an 8-year-old who has never learned that some questions aren't supposed to be asked out loud. "If you were at the office, why did you tell the phone lady it was Aunt Carol's work when you called to change the appointment time?" Nobody moved. Emma had been in the car with him 2 Thursdays ago when he'd called the hospital's front desk to reschedule Carol's chemo appointment by an hour.
She hadn't understood any of the backstory.
She'd simply heard her father say a name, Aunt Carol, that didn't exist, as far as this family's official story went, and file it away the way children file away everything, without judgment, without agenda, just fact.
She had no idea what she'd just done. She reached for another roll.
Diane set her wine glass down very slowly. "Aunt Carol," she repeated, in a voice that had gone completely flat. Thomas didn't answer right away. I watched him, my husband, the steadiest man I had ever known, sit at that table and make a decision in real time, in front of 11 relatives and his mother and his daughter, about which loyalty he was finally going to choose. "Carol," he said, and his voice, when it came, was steadier than I expected.
"My sister. She has cancer, Mom.
Stage 3. I've been sitting with her every Thursday for the last 6 weeks, so she isn't going through chemo alone." The table erupted, not loudly, but in that dense, overlapping way families do, half a dozen hushed conversations at once, someone's fork clattering against a plate. Diane's face had gone white, then red. "You've been lying to this family for 6 weeks. "I've been lying to this family for 22 years, Mom." I just finally stopped. Later, after the table had scattered into uncomfortable small groups and Emma had been sent to watch a movie with her cousins, I found Thomas and Diane alone in the kitchen. Diane's hands were braced on the counter. "You know how this looks," Diane said quietly. "After everything. After I raised you both alone."
"I know how it looks to you," Thomas said.
"But Mom, she's dying, or she might be. And I spent 22 years choosing you over her because I was scared of exactly this conversation."
"I'm not doing it anymore. I love you. That hasn't changed."
"But I'm not going to let you take her away from me twice." Diane's voice dropped, and for the first time in the years I'd known her, it wasn't sharp, it was small. "If you keep seeing her, you understand there are things I'll have to reconsider."
"The house.
What I leave to who?" I saw something shift in Thomas's shoulders, not anger, something closer to grief settling into its final shape. "Then reconsider it," he said. "I'm not choosing a will over my sister. Not again." I wish I could tell you Diane came around overnight. She didn't. 4 weeks after Thanksgiving, she barely spoke to Thomas, and when she did, it was clipped, formal, wounded. Old patterns don't dissolve just because one person decides to stop feeding them. But something had shifted, and shifted things don't fully go back. Carol finished her chemo in February. The scans came back clear, not guaranteed forever, her doctors were careful to say, but clear for now, which in that world is its own kind of miracle. Thomas cried when he told me, standing in our kitchen, the same kitchen where he'd once tried to explain 22 years of silence in a single conversation. In March, something happened that none of us expected. Diane called Carol. Not through Thomas. Directly. I don't know everything that was said, that conversation belongs to the two of them, not to this story, but I know it lasted 40 minutes, and I know Carol called Thomas afterward, crying in a way he said he hadn't heard since they were kids. In April, Diane drove out to Carol's chemo follow-up appointment. She didn't go inside the treatment room. Some bridges take longer than a single spring to rebuild, but she sat in the waiting room the entire time, and afterward, she went back to Carol's apartment for coffee. Carol still has a chipped blue mug from the lake house their family used to rent every August when she and Thomas were kids, the one with the loon painted on the side, the paint worn thin from decades of washing. She'd kept it through 2 moves, a divorce, and 22 years of estrangement, the way people keep things they're not ready to explain even to themselves. That April afternoon, Diane brought her own coffee mug from home and set it down on Carol's small kitchen table, right next to that same chipped blue mug with the fading loon.
2 mugs. Not matching. Sitting together anyway.
I used to think the worst thing that could happen in a marriage was discovering a lie. I've since learned there's something more complicated than that, discovering that the people you love have been taught, sometimes for decades, that love has to be earned through silence. My husband didn't lie to me because he stopped trusting me. He lied to me because somewhere along the way, his family had convinced him that the truth always costs something, and he'd spent his whole life trying to avoid the bill. It took an 8-year-old, who understood none of the history and none of the stakes, to ask the one question none of the adults in that family had been brave enough to ask in over 20 years. Why didn't you just tell the truth?
I don't know if Diane and Carol will ever be what they once were.
I don't know if Thomas has fully forgiven himself for the years he spent choosing silence. But I know that mug still sits on Carol's kitchen table, next to Diane's, every time she visits now. And I know that in our house, we don't keep Thursdays a secret anymore. Sometimes the biggest truths in a family aren't uncovered by detectives, or arguments, or confrontations at all. Sometimes they are uncovered by someone too young to know they are not supposed to ask. If your child, or someone with no stake in the outcome, asked one innocent question that unraveled a secret your family had kept for years, do you think the truth coming out that way would feel like a relief, or a wound? Tell me in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more real, honest family stories every week.